This is TWIS. This Week in Science, episode number 994, recorded on Wednesday, November 20th, 2024. Play around with science. Something great will happen. I know it will. I'm Dr. Kiki, and tonight on the show, we will fill your head with fun fossils, haunted houses, and monkeying around. But first, thanks to our amazing Patreon sponsors for their generous support of TWIS. You can become a part of the Patreon community at patreon.com/thisweekinscience.
Disclaimer. The following program contains scientific content intended for listeners of all ages, including babies, very old pets, and whatever's growing in the back of your fridge. And yes, you can call it an experiment until you are ready to deal with it. Some material may be objectionable to cats. We're never sure which material, as they are unspecific in their disdain. If you are interested in any of the studies, experiments, or methods discussed, we highly recommend you learn more about them. Links on the website. If you disagree with any of the content or just don't trust the validity of the methods or results of a study, cool, no notes. Links on the website. While the views and opinions of our listening audience may not reflect those of the show, the hosts, and the media company under which we operate, we usually agree, and we will always have your back in an argument, even when we don't. If you are looking for a show light on facts, short on science, and lacking in intelligent conversation, great news, you have plenty of other options. If you want to jump into really interesting conversations or escape from uninteresting ones, we've got you covered here on This Week in Science, coming up next.
I've got the kind of mind that can't get enough. I want to learn everything. I want to fill it all up with new discoveries that happen every day of the week. There's only one place to go to find the knowledge I seek. I want to know what's happening, what's happening, what's happening this week in science. What's happening, what's happening, what's happening this week in science.
Good science to you, Kiki.
And a good science to you too, Justin. And everyone else out there. Welcome to another episode of This Week in Science. We are back again, as we do on a weekly basis, come around to these haunts of the internets and talk about science. So good to have you all here. So good to have you here, Justin, so we can talk about science. Woohoo! All right, I have tons of stuff for the show ahead. Stories about making new mice from old things. This is almost a Halloween story, but it's not.
Wait, say this again? Can you repeat that? Because I thought I heard it, but it didn't make sense to my brain.
It doesn't make sense to brains, but it's true. Making old mice. Now I'm saying it wrong. Making new mice from old
New mice.
things.
Things.
Yes.
Okay. Now I'm intrigued.
Dark Energy from DESI. Got a new announcement.
Yeah, that's how I love
out.
having a DESI story.
Lots of good papers and stuff out this week on the archive. Bird neighbors and how neighborly they are, actually, like what little spies they are, and the benefits of play, along with AI poetry, because that's great.
Oh gosh, it probably is, actually.
It's probably really good. What do you have, Justin?
I've got Neander-games, a haunted house study, a real haunted house that was studied.
This is one that came out like a couple of years ago. Remember
No.
This is different because there was a haunted house study a couple of years ago that was done.
I think there's probably one every year. This is actually a health study. It's the health benefits of being in a haunted house.
All right. I'm excited.
Yeah, 7,000-year-old Canadian nuts. And what's the last one? Hallucinating Egyptians.
You've brought some really fun stuff. I am excited about the show ahead, and I hope that everybody else is as well. And if you are not yet subscribing to This Week in Science, why not Come on, subscribe. Make sure those notifications are set so that when we go live on Wednesdays, 8 p.m. Pacific time, you over on YouTube and Facebook and Twitch, you'll know when we're going live and you can join us live, or you'll know when there's a recording and you can get that recording, or you can subscribe to the podcast that's edited and is so wonderful. That is most places that podcasts are found. So search for This Week in Science, TWIS Science, or just go to our website, TWIS.org, and find all the things. But it is time for the science. Yeah?
Yeah, let's bring it.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay. I'm going to start it off with those new mice because this is a very interesting, cool study. Okay. So for years, we've been talking about pluripotent stem cells and how to get organisms, let's try and take cells from organisms and like skin cells and give them certain transcriptional factors, little instructions that come from genes to tell them to go back in time and go back to being baby cells that can turn into any cell in the body. And we've done so well at doing this kind of thing that we have taken skin cells of mice and turned them into gametes. We've turned them into real baby cells and then made baby mice, right? Well, these researchers, they went a step further. So there's a set of transcriptional factors, 4 factors consisting of compounds like SOX, XOX, or what's another one? POU is another. There's OCT4. There's a number of these factors, 4 of them exactly. They're called the Yamanaka factors. And the researcher Yamanaka, he's gotten a Nobel Prize. There's like all sorts of stuff. And actually now at UCSF and their genetics research labs, they actually have like a whole series of prizes they give based on Yamanaka and the stuff that Yamanaka did. Okay, so these researchers publishing in Nature Communications, they were like, okay. We know that these transcriptional factors are important, and we know that when we use them, cells recognize them at any state. Cells recognize them and go, oh, I got to change what I'm doing and turn back to this other thing and start rebuilding. We will build again, right? So they said, how long ago did these instructions become the instructions that lead to stem cells? How long ago did these particular genetic segments become the genetic segments that made instructions that made cells go, I'm going to be a progenitor cell. I'm going to be a cell that can make another thing.
Right, because, okay. So I don't know the story.
But guess what?
But the guess would have to be, why would you have this mechanism? When would this come into play? It would come into play at some point when you're like, when evolutionarily or developmentally an organism is like, wait a second. We've taken a wrong path. Let's reset. There's some sort of warning signal that says we are doing something wrong or there's damage and we need to. So it's either a early regenerative thing or an early developmental check where it's saying, oh, no, we're going the wrong way. Pull it back.
So more like structural or just how the, the form of an organism, keep the path. Oh, you're missing the path. Come back.
Yeah, the feedback comes in and you're like, whoa, hang on. So those would be the guesses.
And they're very, very good guesses. So what these researchers did is they went, okay. When we look at the evolutionary history of animals, multicellularity popped up around 700 million years ago. And they went, okay, well, let's look beyond that and go. And in multicellularity, every animal, every organism we look at has SOX genes, has OCT genes, has these POUs. All of these things are in there. And so they went, let's look even further back, and they ended up going back to an outgroup of a unicellular organism, Coanaflagellata. They decided to look at a completely different group of organisms related to metazoans in a group called the holozoans. These are unicellular organisms, not yet multicellular at all, and they determined that they have gene segments that are analogous to SOX and POU. And they went, okay, what will happen if we replace the mouse SOX segments with this dinoflagellate SOX segment? And so they did. And it worked. And the SOX genes continued to work as functional SOX genes, doing what they do to push forward the form of an organism. SOX genes are very, very related to morphology and form. And so they found that the mice were chimeric. And so not all of the cells in the mouse bodies did become, they weren't a complete, perfect 100% admixture. It was, so they had some black hair and some white hair, and they looked like these little mice that had more color than they should have. But basically what it showed is that there were some cells that picked up these added genes that were not the normal gene motifs, that were actually from holozoans, unicellular organisms. And they worked just fine.
So there's a developmental stage in all multicellular life. It's part of this thing called like the hourglass hypothesis, where everything starts out very uniform. These genes make this, these genes make this, these genes make this. Structurally, it's just sort of like you're kind of set. And it goes into this point in the middle where there is an intense amount of diversification of the cellular makeup. And then it kind of like goes back, okay, we have our diversity now. Let's go and keep everything very uniform and just make these things going forward. So what this is suggesting to me is that in the middle of the hourglass, when things become very diverse, is when these stem cells are likely doing their job of differentiating into different things. So then it makes sense that pretty much all multicellular life is going to follow this sort of this stage in the middle where this diversification and then pluripotency of form comes in, so that you can make a diversely tissued multicellular life form. So it's wild that we can find it so uniformly preserved across very vastly different life forms. But then, that's the whole point sometimes of these fundamental building blocks, is that once it works, you don't deviate from it, because if you deviate
from it, something breaks, right?
And natural selection makes it so that error isn't repeated.
Yeah. So they found that there's a real connection between the SOX from the coanaflagellate and with OCT4 in the mice, and another, this POU3, which is a different transcriptor, a different factor that transcription factor that they used as well. And these were they were found involved in the mammalian pluripotency. So they were able to, the SOX, from the SOX genes specifically, more so than the POU, more so than other things that they looked at, were able to cross over. And so not the POU elements that they used were not as good at cross binding and making connections with mammalian DNA elements. And so what that means is that there are some limitations that we don't really understand, what is behind them at this point in time. But SOX genes especially, which we know are very, very related to form and function, they form cross elements and are able to partner in a way that allows this to happen, which is, I think, very interesting. But like you said, we've talked before about the conservation, right, of conserved regions of the genome. if it's not broke, don't fix it. And if you do fix it, make sure you do it better. But there might be more of these pluripotency regulators. There might be more areas that we should be looking at within outgroups from mammalia, right? From multicellularity, to be able to see, what are the important factors that create the basics of how multicellularity came to be and to function, and that cannot be gotten rid of. So, yeah. Anyway, very cool. They used unicellular DNA, genes, stuff like that, to basically make pluripotent stem cells that made little baby mice that were just fine. They induced pluripotency. Da-da-da! New mice from choanoflagellates.
Choanoflagellates.
Yes. I think it's very exciting. Anyway, exciting stuff. New things. Scientists are wacky and wild, doing really world-changing things right now. This is very exciting. Let's look back in the past again. You want to talk about games? I like games. Let's play it.
Yeah, this is out of Aarhus University in Denmark. Researchers are suggesting that. Oh wait, no, that's the wrong one. You wanted to go back. You wanted to go back in time. Then we'll move over to
whatever you want to do. I don't know.
All right, we'll start with this one because I already started. This is researchers suggesting that recreational fear, such as a haunted house experience, may reduce inflammation in individuals with at least low-grade inflammation. So we already know that fear and acute stress are sort of fundamental mechanisms for survival. It's that fight or flight response where you get a lot of adrenaline. Woo, got to do something. Now, chronic stress, like prolonged being into that condition, is heavily associated with unhealthy inflammation throughout the body. Body kind of gets overwhelmed by constantly being in that state of stress. But brief activations of that system have previously been seen to impact the immune system positively. Like your body goes into sort of a high alert preparation stage. We're like, okay, we're going to put off all this inflammation for the moment and get ready to act. Okay, so the Aarhus team was curious about the potential effects of a voluntary fear experience on these inflammation levels. And so they basically used a haunted house around Halloween. One of these, now this isn't like a kid's haunted house, right? Where you like walk around and it's like, oh, look, it's spooky. Now this was like a jump scare haunted house for adults.
And I'm looking here at they have a graphic of their experimental design, and they're like, oh, before exposure, okay, 2 didn't go through the haunting and whatever. And then they're like, after the exposure, they have like 150 people. And then they're like, oh, 23 people didn't show up to get their blood sample after that. Like, they're like, I'm done. I hate you so much. I'm never coming back. I mean, that's not what it says, but that's like 23 people dropped out after their haunted houses. So this was not any like little baby haunted house.
No,
people like, leave me alone. No, I'm not going back.
But yeah, I mean, it's pretty interesting to do blood samples before and after. This isn't just a self-reported thing or anything like this. This is they were looking for C-reactive proteins levels and immune cell counts. They were, and so basically, they showed a decrease in the low-level inflammation from before, and I guess they had the blood tests immediately before they went through this jump scare haunted house situation, and then they tested them again after, and then again 3 days after. So there's a couple of follow-ups, and yeah, they found that it reduced. I love this. Future research is needed to confirm the observed effects and explore the mechanisms underlying the relationship between recreational fear and immune function before clinical applications can be considered significant enough to incorporate acute fear into a healthcare setting.
I can't even imagine putting acute fear into a healthcare setting. I mean, we've got things like fear of needles. We've got things
so
like,
that's a perfect one.
It's
doctors like, oh, actually, it's fine. Your treatment follow-up, and then take out like a giant needle, right? And like start working with it. Like, oh, we're going to get you out of here in just a few minutes. You'll be fine. And the nurse
shows up. Yeah, the nurse shows up and you ask them, and I'm saying, yes, ask them their name, and they say Nurse Ratchet.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
You do a little jump scare at the counter. You walk up and there's nobody there, and it's like, ring bell.
Jump up.
Somebody comes up hot.
Oh my gosh. I want to be Nurse Mare on Elm Street.
Or actually in the States, I guess you could just be like, none of this is covered by your insurance. By the way. Oh. Okay.
I think that gets into chronic and like
I know that's already chronic stress, right?
Yeah. I do think it's bring it back to the story, because this is fascinating.
Oh no! I was about to move on from the story.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I just think it's fascinating that, I think we did report on something by this same group a year or two ago. Could have been much longer ago, because time, what is it even anymore? But I remember they did the basics, the beginnings of this, and I thought it was so fascinating. And to see them come back with this deeper study now that actually does show, actual changes in, the immune system, in the measures that they're looking at, and that there might be a benefit to acute stress.
Yeah, and so also
we're just on a daily basis. Let's all go get scared once in a while.
Well, people do though. They do like horror movies and scary movies and ghost stories and all of these things that people have done that kind of give them a fright. Maybe there's a secret health benefit to it that we've been unaware of, but the body says, I need you to go get scared again. Here, go see the next terrible, awful, scary movie, or let's sit around and listen to a ghost story.
I think it's, it's kind of like, the hygiene hypothesis, where it's like, if you're not around bacteria or other things or get exposed to them, then your immune system has nothing to do and might become hyperactive. But I'm making a very weird analogy, in that chronic stress is something that a lot of us deal with now. And we know that chronic stress is really, really bad for us. That chronic stress itself has, like, over time, metabolic impacts that are super negative. But the acute stress, like a little tiny cute one that you find in a kawaii store, that.
So are you suggesting that
if you don't have a little bit of stress,
if we took people with chronic stress and
got rid of
terrified them
every once in a while,
terrified them.
I am not recommending anything of the sort.
And then after their chronic stress, they would be reduced, because they'd be like, "Oh, it's still not as bad as what happened last week."
Right? Yes, possibly. Well, there are thoughts of like this is how stimulating the immune system, and I'm not saying the fear system to stimulate the immune stuff, but there are
This is
thoughts
what
about
this
this,
showed.
about how the autoimmune disorders and people who say, oh, well, bee sting therapy is good for autoimmune disorders, because what it does is the autoimmune system is like, I got to do something, got to do something, got to do something. The bee sting therapy is used to periodically trigger like an acute stress, as opposed to allowing your body to just be like chronically attacking itself. It gives it something to go after.
Yeah.
The
By the
bee
way,
venom.
any of those. What was the? There's always some product being sold on a podcast that's not ours. That's talking about putting your immune system into super mode or hyperdrive or whatever. Like that's not what you want your immune system to be doing all the time.
You
It's
don't
actually
want actually
it's like get this supplement and it'll give you chronic stress. It's like no,
right.
stop.
That's it.
Stop selling
Exactly.
that. That's not a good product. Don't buy it.
If you do this, it hotwires your immune system. Your immune system's going to be working all the time. Oh, you're going to have
No, that's not
allergies.
what you want. Yeah,
You're going to
that's
be really
terrible.
allergic to everything. It's true. Yeah. But I don't think we all need to be scared all the time, but I do think there is something to be, or even every once in a while. But there is something to be said for the ways in which our lives and experiences, and maybe the evolutionary and psychological impacts of those, translate into what's actually happening inside our bodies in the relative homeostasis. How does that keep going, huh?
And in this whole like maybe the body knows better than you do. Like I have never had any kind of inflammation at all. Low level, regular level, like I don't even understand the concept. Also, I have no desire to ever be scared.
You don't
Like
need to.
I've never watched a horror movie. I would never go to a haunted house. I don't do any extreme sport, anything. Maybe it's my body's way of telling me like you don't need it. That's why. That's why you're not interested in these things.
Because you don't, your body doesn't need it. But obviously, I
Maybe
really, really
behind
love
the curtain.
the women who allowed their photo to be used, and it was shared by the people doing the study, that this photo being used is from their research. It's not something taken off the internet.
Okay.
And it's two participants who agreed to have their photos shared along with the media for this study, and they have dirt on their faces and are being attacked by somebody in a ghillie suit. It's I would be scared. I don't know what's happening. It seems as though somebody threw things at people. I don't know what's happening here. I don't know what happened.
Denmark doesn't have Halloween.
So they just go for it.
It's sort of being introduced, but nobody really understands the concept of it. But it's very much not for kids here.
No.
Very much targeted at young adults.
Denmark's one of the countries that came up with Krampus. So
Krampus. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Oh, you don't know Krampus?
I've never heard of it.
Scary, scary, like steals children and hurts people Santa.
What?
It's awesome.
Never heard of anything like this.
If you're not a good kid, Krampus is gonna come and take you away.
That's not anything I've heard about in Denmark.
You have to look it up. Well, I think it was Vienna, maybe Austria. There was a Krampus
maybe Austria.
parade.
It's not a Danish Christmas is super friendly. It's like little Lisa running around.
All those European countries, whatever.
No, not Denmark.
All right.
Denmark has a very sweet Christmas. Okay.
Moving on from Krampus, scary adult Halloween, and Denmark's holidays, we're going to jump into gravity with the dark energy spectroscopic instrument, which Justin has been talking a lot about over the last couple of years, but that has been doing a big, huge scan of an area of the sky, looking at 6 million galaxy clusters, looking back at like 11 billion years in our universe's history, to really take a look and look at, not just, pretty solar systems or pretty lights in the sky, but actually be looking at what we've come to understand are superclusters, which are big formations of mass, of stuff that has mass, that are held together somehow, that seem to be clustered together in space, like a continent, kind of, but in space. Everything, it seems to be held together by weird dust filaments and other little bits and things, but big bits of matter seem to be clumpy. Our universe is clumpy rather than evenly distributed. So if it's clumpy, is Einstein's theory of general relativity accurate? Is the standard model accurate? Is gravity, does it work the same around the universe wherever we look? And what the heck are some of the things that are involved in how the universe might have formed and might have been evolving through its history? And so from DESI, the Dark Energy Spectroscopic Instrument, they put a bunch of data out back in April. And this is an international collaboration from like 70 institutions around the world, but it's managed by Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. And so the researchers in this latest, most specific analysis of all of the data have come to determine that, hey, Einstein's general relativity ideas seem to be working just as we expect. Gravity behaves like it's predicted. So the model of the universe, kind of how different models might work, or have been limited so that different proposed explanations are less likely. And this is also going to come back to the accelerating expansion of our universe. So when we talk about the things that are present in our universe, we talk about matter and mass, baryonic matter. We talk about dark matter that we can't see. And then we talk about dark energy. And we talk about how like dark matter and dark energy are kind of these fudge factors. And dark energy specifically with general relativity is kind of like, Einstein came up with that and was like, it's just what's happening. There's acceleration. Something's happening there.
Well, what he did was he actually eliminated acceleration or deceleration, because he created in his model everything. He's like, I figured it all out. But he had what was the concept at the time was a finite universe. One that was there was a set amount and it wasn't expanding or contracting. And he looked at his equation and was like, this either, because of the way gravity affects gravity, is either expanding or contracting. Space-time itself actually would be expanding or contracting. And he was like, fudge factor, put in the, so that it wasn't going to expand or contract. He created a constant. Set it there. Now they've changed that constant because they realized that the universe is expanding. So then it had to get changed. But that is supposedly driven by the dark energy, which is basically a thing that we cannot calculate because it is the energy of the void.
Right.
The little bubbling ups. That sort of resonant energy floating in the vacuum of space.
And so but we don't understand it, but we have data from other experiments, baryon acoustic oscillations, like a whole bunch of things that we've measured historically have led us to believe that we had the Big Bang, inflation, and then we started expansion. and that expansion, and then based on a bunch of this data, it was like, oh, expansion is accelerating, and it seems to be accelerating everywhere. But then everybody was like, is that really what's happening? And so the question has been like, okay, are we Big Bang and then we go out into the like keep accelerating and expanding forever until everything is so far apart, everything goes into dark coldness and heat death of the universe and like or is it like a yo-yo where it expands and then contracts? Or is there something else going on where it's like maybe in different places and different times, dark energy, which is this expansion factor that, like Justin said, seems to be kind of pushing things apart, whereas dark matter is more pull things together that are clumpy. We haven't known anything about that. We haven't been able to figure that out. And so this data, which is still baby, like only 6 million galaxies. I mean, come on.
No, well, it's 6 million. Is it 6 million galaxies or clusters? Because I thought the number of galaxies was actually much, much higher than 6 million that they've collected data.
6 million galaxy clusters. You are correct. Sorry about that. Yes. So anyway, this is, though, a conversation about what the data has come out that they have deliberated on, that they have come to agree upon. And there are a number of papers published this week on archive.org. So they have not yet been peer reviewed, but they would not. I think
they would need to peer review them wrote the articles. Like sometimes,
it's 1,000 people, 70 institutions internationally.
There's nobody. They're going to call me. Hey, Justin, what do you think? Looks fine.
Great.
You guys did good job. Gold star.
And so the exciting thing about this is that, okay, the data from what they have looked at in these, what they call baryon acoustic oscillations. So baryonic matter, which is stuff that we can see. And then we've got acoustics, right? Which is going to be the way that this signal comes to us. What is the variation there? And how does it change if we've got more or less gravity involved over time? And what this research suggests is that dark energy is not constant, that it is dynamic, and it has been dynamic throughout a history, the history of our universe. So it has shifted, and the word they use is dynamical, that dark energy might actually be evolving over time. And so in addition to April's results, looking at this clustering based on the baryon acoustic oscillations, they now have this full shape analysis, which they're measuring how galaxies and matter are distributed on different scales. They're doing a bunch of cross checks. They tried to hide the way the data from the scientists, so that the data doing the cross checks had no idea what was going on, to basically sure it was randomized, which is pretty cool. And researcher Dragan Hütterer at University of Michigan, who also co-leads the DESI group that's interpreting cosmological data. This is the first time that DESI has looked at the growth of cosmic structure. We're showing a tremendous new ability to probe modified gravity and improve constraints on models of dark energy. And this is only the tip of the iceberg. So they suggest that this could bring much, much more. And they are analyzing the first 3 years of collected data, and they expect to have a lot more to provide to us in the spring of 2025. Dark matter makes up about a quarter of the known universe. Dark energy, about 70% of everything that we don't know, that we can't see. The idea that we can take pictures of the universe and then start tackling these fundamental questions, says Mark Maus, a PhD student at Berkeley Lab in UC Berkeley. He says it's mind-blowing. So this study also puts limits on the mass of neutrinos, which we have a hard time pinning down because they don't like to interact with stuff. And they have not been able to be precisely measured previously. So previous experiments found the sum of the masses of the three types of neutrinos should be at least 0.059 electron volts per Coulomb squared. When an electron has a mass of about 511,000 electron volts per Coulomb squared, and DESI's results indicate that the sum should be less than 0.071 electron volts per Coulomb squared. So we got a little window in there between 0.59 and 0.071. So there's something in there. Gravity seems like standard model is still holding up. Gravity, according to Einstein's theory of general relativity, working like it should. Dark energy is evolving, is dynamic, and might mean that we are not just going to continue to accelerate in our expansion and just have the long, cold death. That perhaps there's other stuff going on, and that we don't know what will happen yet. The story's not over yet, folks. I think Katie Mack needs to write a new book. Anyway.
Well, but the takeaway here, though,
Calling her out right now.
When we talk about dark matter as dynamical, what we're
dark energy. Dark energy is dynamical.
Oh, I thought it was dark matter.
Dark energy, the acceleration force, the energy, the force that's accelerating expansion of the universe. But it's not accelerating it. It's Did I say dark matter?
I thought it was dark matter. I might we need different names. It's probably
need different words.
Probably my ears. So if the suggestion is dark energy is dynamical, then we're talking about the Justin Jackson completely unproven hypotheses that space-time itself could be the dynamical aspect. But I thought that there was an element of the dark matter being dynamical, meaning that it was not
dark energy.
No. I thought that it was dark matter that was being dynamical, in that there was less of an effect of dark matter in the early formation of galaxies.
I don't know that. I cannot answer that question.
But I think that was some other study I was looking at that was proposing, but it fits with Mond, which also doesn't fit with a lot of other things that we can confirm and see and observe and recognize that it's wrong. But with that one thing they predicted 20 years ago, that dark matter would be less involved in the early formation. But dark energy, by the way, the reason that it's unseen and we can't measure it is because it's the energy that is dispersed across the vacuum everywhere in space, right? It's not that it's so super mysterious that it's unfathomably undetectable, like dark matter seems to be invisible to us. It's that dark energy it's the little teeniest bits of energy but everywhere in floating in vacuum of space, and therefore it's what? How do you detect everywhere at once? That's more of the problem than the mysterious nature of it. It's we want to detect how many air molecules are everywhere in our atmosphere, which we could probably calculate, but
it's like jelly beans in a jar.
Yeah, but on a cosmic scale, right? The cosmic jelly bean jar.
Mm-hmm. So Kevin Reardon is making some really great comments that I just quickly want to address about the Einstein part of this. Einstein wasn't and isn't part of the expansion of the universe generally. That was only the Hubble redshift folks. And so I want to make that clarification. So there were findings that our universe was expanding. Einstein had made his
cosmological constant that prevented it from expanding.
Should have, right? Yes, should have. But he
was like, "Well, take it how I see it, and then put in this constant so it stays that way." It was artificial, but yeah.
Kevin says Einstein was only involved with how light worked, which is basically mass, gravity, how light was being what
Well,
we saw,
I will pause
what
that.
we could perceive, how it was being influenced by other things, which
I will
would
pause that just for a second, just to clarify, because Einstein was way less involved in light than people think.
Yeah.
Because light is the ruler that was used to describe gravity.
Yes.
And the rate of anything, like the speed, it could have just as correctly have identified it as the speed of gravity squared, because it's exactly the same. And so he was using the measuring stick of light.
He was looking at stars and galaxies and other things. He had a measuring stick. He was going, oh, we have things are getting wibbly wobbly. What's happening there? And I'm going to make up a thing that seems to explain it all. Theory of general relativity. We have all that stuff. General relativity is part of the standard model. It is not the standard model. It's part of it.
And also, it wasn't invented exactly. It was he used all he basically combined
all
the
data that had come through
and added a geometry to it that made it fit the actual universe.
Right. And then you have the Hubble redshift happening. And then because of that, it's like, oh, there's something else happening there. But it's still, what are we seeing, right? What light is making it to our planet that we can measure? I mean, what radio signals, what in the electromagnetic spectrum can we see and measure, and how can we explain that mathematically, geometrically, all of that? And so from that, I think I just wanted to clarify that the way that Einstein and bringing in general relativity into this, why it's important is because we're still looking at how matter and mass influence the light that we are able to perceive, and trying to come up with the calculations that all make sense to explain how it's working. Yeah. All right, tell me about some old games.
This is research led by Universidad de Burgos, Spain. There's a cave in Spain where they have Neanderthal finds. Actually, there's many caves in Spain with Neanderthal finds. This one is a Prado Vargas cave in Burgos, Spain. Probably mispronouncing everything, but it's fine. They found 15 Upper Cretaceous era marine fossils in this cave. What's really remarkable about these is that they are found intermixed with a layer of Neanderthal activity, and none of these fossils are from this cave, and many of them come from areas or deposits that are likely as much as 30 kilometers away. So what they're suggesting is this is an example of Neanderthals collecting. They find rocks, they've got interesting fossils, and we have seen all sorts of collecting behavior in the past from Neanderthals. Seashell collections, some things that are turned into beads, some things that are ornamental, and a lot of fossils. They found previously at other sites, they found like stone axes that have the fossils sort of centered on the biface, so it would be like a very cool looking like stone axe with a fossil right in the side of it. Like, oh, that's like totally cool. So they're pointing out that because they don't know why, obviously, this collection of fossils are in here. They have a few theories as to why. One of which is that they could have been used, as gifts, as nice trinkets. It's like, hey, here, look what I found, and handing it off to the others. And it could have been used in trade, like because some of them come from so far away. There's a possibility that these were used in inter-Neanderthal trade. Like, I don't have a good axe to give you, but I'll give you these cool looking things I found. Another suggestion they make is that it could be kids who are collecting them. Either they're finding them themselves or the adults are finding them and giving them to the kids. It's like, look what I found when I was out hunting. What the study doesn't say, and I think is a very interesting thing, is a possibility. It's that these could have been used as a game. One of the things that archaeologists are just terrible at is identifying leisure usage. Toys,
everything had to have a purpose, right? It still does.
And when it doesn't, whenever something doesn't have a purely utilitarian purpose in the past, it becomes a ritualistic thing, right? Oh, this must have been used in a ritual, had a symbolic significance. What they tend to leave out is maybe they had games. Maybe they played. Maybe these were toys. And what's interesting to me, too, is these are all about 2 inches around 5 centimeters around, somewhere in that range. So they were all like very hand-holdable, and you could kind of roll. And some of these, would be a fossil on one side, but not on the other. And They're all kind of rounded, so you could sort of see something between a marble game or a dice game or, a Fossil the Gathering with complex sets of rules depending on the rarity of the fossil that you have that you're playing with. Or the other possibility, maybe they were fossil collecting. Maybe they were
really
this
interested in things that
extinct
came
race
before.
of hominins were fascinated by these extinct creatures that they were finding in a fossil record and were beginning to collect and identify them.
That I think that's the play, yes, absolutely. But additionally, the question would be, if you don't know what fossils are, but what you're finding are things that look like rocks, but rocks are always different. Rocks never look the same. Every rock is different, but fossils, very often you have, the certain spiral shell, or you have, the pill bug shape, or you have, a fossil is repeatable because it's a type, which is different from other rocks. So they would be something.
It has a design element in it, and it also, as much as rocks look different, they nap, or when they're making
and fossils
tools,
don't.
They nap out.
But fossils don't in the same way.
Right.
Yeah, maybe they use them as a currency.
Yeah.
I've got more of my spirals. You want 5 spirals for, your berry bushes? I have no idea.
It could be an early form of money. It could be an early form of gaming, and it could just be scientific curiosity. But regardless,
people have spoon collections. People like beads.
Oh, yeah.
People have random
Stamps.
collections of things, right? I'm going to collect all the spirals. Collect them all.
We have, of course, Pokemon. Okay, you got a lot of gaming collecting, Pokemon stuff, right? But you also have more like theme stuff. Like everybody knows somebody who went through a problem, habitually collecting something on a theme. Like you go to a house and there's like porcelain frogs everywhere. Lawn ornament frogs, frog pictures on the wall, and you're like, these people are like too into frogs or pigs or ducks or whatever the thing is. People can get obsessed.
But think about it. It's sometimes not the people who are obsessed. The people started liking a little thing and they got a couple, and then everybody started getting it for them as gifts.
Like Blair and the hippos. Everybody sent Blair hippo stuff. Was it hippos or was it something else? Was it pandas? And then she just kept getting inundated with panda gifts. No, you're totally right. It's not even the collector.
Because she doesn't like pandas, and so it's funny to give her a panda gift. But we know Neanderthals were social. We know that they had jewelry. We know that they had social structure and gave gifts upon their dead, right? Their dead had little collections and things similar to later civilizations that with burial pyres and other things with gifts to the Egyptian dead, etc. Who's to say that, somebody didn't pick up a spiral thing and everybody then was like, we're all going to give you spiral things. And that became the way it went.
And the other thing too is that this also is yet another indication of abstract thinking, of cognitive appreciation beyond animalistic, viewpoint of utility in the, wandering around the world. It's just yet another example that Neanderthals were a lot more like us than, of course, now I'm starting to almost get, I'm almost starting to get tired of the trope of like Neanderthals are more intelligent than we thought, because we have so much evidence at this point that we shouldn't even be talking about the initial conception of them as being primitive.
We should be really just looking out for what incredible things we missed on, like, what technologies did they have that we are not aware of, right?
Totally.
What were they doing? How were they conserving their culture?
We now know that there's cave art. We now know that there's synthetic materials that they created to adhese their tools together. We've learned so much now. The healing abilities and carrying abilities and all of these things. And so, yes, collecting of interesting fossils. It's either a game or a scientific pursuit. Maybe it's money, but they were way ahead of human endeavors in these things.
Oh, for sure. We had to catch up. Yeah. Maybe the Neanderthals helped give us a hand up. Who knows?
Yeah.
Well, who knows? Thank you, everybody. I hope that you're sharing This Week in Science, just like a viral shell game from the past into the future. I hope that you are telling people about the science that you're learning here. I hope you're giving people information to add to their informational collections that they're making, thanks to This Week in Science. Thank you so much for being here. If you're enjoying the show, please head over to TWIS.org, where you can find our Zazzle store. The Zazzle store is filled with all sorts of fun things that are TWIS related. We've got products and merchandise that Blair has designed from past This Week in Science calendars. We do not have a This Week in Science calendar this year. We're very sad to say. It has there has been time and energy that was not available this year. But we can talk to Blair about that next week, maybe. And say, what's up, Blair? Can't you get your child to make us a calendar? Come on. Art's in the family. But anyway, head over to our Zazzle store. Click on the Zazzle link at TWIS.org, and that will get you to our store, where there's lots of TWIS merchandise that you can use to give as gifts, to give to yourself as a gift. The holidays are coming up. And it's also a way that you can help to continue to support TWIS by purchasing some of those goods. Additionally, our Patreon link is there, so you can click on the Patreon link. It'll take you over there. If you click on that, you can choose your level of support as a subscription basis, and if $10 and more per month, and we will thank you by name at the end of the show. And who knows, maybe for the holidays, there'll be some special, become a Patreon patron supporter specials that will run. Who knows? We'll see. Get in on those things. But that's not why you're here with us. You're here with us because you enjoy the science and you enjoy the community. So really keep hanging out. Bring in more good people for the chat rooms and for the conversation. Let's keep this show going. And we will continue to bring our science to you if you keep on coming back. We have more great science ahead. This is This Week in Science. All right, I'm going to jump ahead to a story that I was going to talk about a little bit later. I hope everyone's having a wonderful time. Let's talk about some backyard birds. Backyard birds. What happens when new birds come joining the neighborhood? You have migrants going from one place to another. You have birds that fledge from the nest and have to go find a new place to live. Suddenly, there's new bird neighbors in the neighborhood, and the birds in the neighborhood are like, what are you doing? And the new neighbors are like, hi, I'm a new neighbor. What do I do here? Where's the best place to eat? How does this work? And so researchers on this study, they looked at a particular species of bird, which in Europe and very commonly also for the Max Planck Institute of Animal Behavior, which is where this research came out of, the Cluster of Excellence, also Collective Behavior at the University of Konstanz in Germany. They published this work in PLOS Biology. They looked at great tits, which are a species of bird that researchers have been looking at in backyards for a very, very, very long time. Paris major has been shown to open milk bottles in backyards, similar to squirrels. It has been shown to solve puzzles. These little tiny birds, which, these are the big, great little tiny birds of the wonderful backyards of England and across Europe. These birds have been able to solve puzzle boxes of various complexity, and they've been able to show that within groups of birds, different population, a single population of birds, that this learning can be passed on from individual to individual. So the birds learn from each other, right? So we know that the great tits, Paris major, they can learn complex puzzles. They can solve complex puzzles. They love getting the food prizes. They're little bird squirrels, basically. And they can learn this stuff by watching each other, and it gets passed along from individual to individual to individual. So you end up with a local population of little birds who all know how to solve a puzzle by pulling a door to the right. Everybody learns it. Everybody knows how to do it in the neighborhood. So what these researchers did is they were like, hey, let's put new birds into the neighborhood. We're going to take birds that have learned to push the door to the left in a different place with a different setting, like different trees around and stuff like that. And we're going to put them into the neighborhood with the trees and all that kind of stuff for the birds.
Is their learning plastic enough?
Is there? And right, do they compete to solve the puzzle? Do they, how does it work out? Turns out that the new birds in the neighborhood, they pay a lot of attention to their new neighbors. That they are good neighbors and they don't want to mess things up, and they pay attention. And sometimes on the very first try, the new birds to a neighborhood will solve a puzzle correctly by pushing it instead of to the left, which is what they used to know, but to the right, because they observed other birds doing it first. They learned it doing it. So yes, I'm going to say these birds are smart enough to start to have this plastic learning. But then the researchers said, well, is it the environment? Is it what's going on? And so then they said, let's take these birds and put them into the right puzzle solution population, but not change the neighborhood. So it's basically as if they were put in a different room that looks like their old neighborhood, but it's got a whole different group of birds in it. It's
okay. So they're saying, I get it. So now they're saying, okay, now you're in an old neighborhood where you always pushed it to the, I don't know what you said,
to the left, to the left, whatever. Yeah.
And is the cue then what environment you're in? And this is the left environment or the right environment, and that's what you're going to take as your tactic. Or are they going to wait and see what the other birds do first and observe and then go forward? Interesting.
And they do not. So when the environment where they learned how to do a puzzle one particular way is exactly the same, even if the birds are all doing other stuff, they still try to solve the puzzles the way that they know because the environment has not changed.
Which
And
which
so,
is a biome adaptability thing, which kind of
yes,
makes sense because if you have
yes.
different biome areas that you're traveling to as a bird, you might have associated them with different survival strategies. So then the environmental cues, that totally makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that they don't they stop observing in the old environment. They stop learning. They're set in their ways. They're a bunch of old, crusty, middle-aged birds now, and they're like,
They would
"Oh, in my day, we always
they
did
would
it like
probably
this."
learn new things if there were new
Yeah,
challenges, but they know what works in their environment. They've already solved that puzzle box, right?
interesting.
They know how to do that thing in that environment. But I think your biome adaptation point is really well taken. And that's what the researchers think as well, which is that it's not necessarily the fact that there are new neighbors, because new neighbors could come into your environment at any point in time. And you don't have to pay attention to them. They don't necessarily, you have to learn whether or not they have a good solution. But if you're new and if everything around you is new, you should trust what others like, that others are what others are doing. And so it shows that these birds, these little teeny tiny birds, have the cognitive plasticity and the awareness to be able to say, "Oh, everything's new. I don't know anything. I'm going to ask my neighbors where I should go to lunch.
Well,
I'm not going to pretend that the chain restaurant is the best place."
yeah, it's the human analogy would be like, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, right?
Yeah.
But then you go to Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, and you still think you're supposed to act like you're in Rome,
No.
right?
No, people do not. I guess I'm very confused by this analogy. This is causing me mental anguish. Anyway, I thought this was a lot of fun. Bird learning. How do birds work, man? Are birds even real?
Yes. Short answer, yes.
Yes.
Long answer is also yes. It's the same.
Yeah. Anyway, be like the birds. Do what your neighbors do. Don't think you know everything if you're in a new place. Anyway, that's what the bird brains, little teeny tiny bird brains, really good at learning new stuff like that. It's cool. Tell me about something else, Justin.
Okay, let's go to a genetic analysis of Canadian hazelnuts.
That sounds like a great switch in topic. Why? Why Canadian hazelnuts?
Well, because scientists are suggesting that the indigenous people of British Columbia, also sometimes referred to as First Nation tribes, cultivated hazelnuts as much as 7,000 years ago. So,
oh wow,
yeah. So this is, and we already know, like, way, thousands of miles away in South America, things like potatoes and tomatoes and other areas, corn, like these bananas, like all sorts of foods that we take for granted, some major staples of our diet, were cultivated many thousands of years ago in the Americas. But when the sort of Western colonization took place, and specifically in this case in Canada, they assumed that the hazelnut trees that the native population was using as a food source was a sort of passive version of agriculture, just sort of taking advantage of the food that's there, and they didn't have any real involvement with it. But there have been stories within the tribes of having brought the hazelnut trees to different areas. And so these researchers are like, I wonder if we can prove that through genetic analysis. And so there's a couple of things that you would expect. So you would expect there to be seed dispersal through, birds or small mammals, squirrels and the like. They take a nut from one tree, they drop it somewhere else. You expect you expect closely grouped trees then to be related. And in many cases, when the researchers looked, that's what they found. The trees nearby were related to trees that were, other trees in that area. But a northern population of beaked hazelnuts revealed something surprising. 5 distinct genetic subgroups, 4 of which could be traced to very far away locations across British Columbia, some as much as 800 kilometers away, which is the exact opposite of what you would expect from a natural distribution pattern. So these trees fan out over a very large archaeological site where the ancestors of some First Nation people lived thousands of years ago, and they found hazelnut pollen in layers dating to about 7,000 years ago, which suggests to the researchers the indigenous people had deliberately brought hazelnuts north from multiple different locations, then tended them, cultivated them. One of the things, too, that's kind of interesting here is that this is a fire dispersal seed. And this is something that's been coming up quite a bit in terms of agriculture. There's a series of papers recently in Australia where different sort of food sources of the Aboriginal people are also fire dispersal seeds, where they need to, get into that high heat for them to pop out and then start the growth cycle. And while the Aboriginals had not been considered to be agriculture societies, the fact that all these wild natural food sources that they use only repopulate through fire and then turn out to only be clustered around areas that were traditionally Aboriginal sites, we're seeing the same thing here with this First Nation group. These are fire dispersal seeds that are clustered around ancient dwelling sites or population centers, and that these seeds were brought from very far away to this location and then cultivated. So it has an interesting ramification under Canadian law.
Yeah, this is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, so the ability for First Nation tribes to lay claim and rights to land in Canadian courts is based on a way back in 2014 Canadian Supreme Court case that says that First Nation peoples tribes would need to prove a continuous, exclusive, and sufficient use of the land in order to lay a claim. Which is kind of stacked against.
Yeah. You have to find all my bones of my ancestors, and then I have to prove that they're the bones of my ancestors. I have to show all these things. It's stacked against anyone who would make that claim.
Right. And then if you don't have agricultural centers, and if you are slightly nomadic following herds or something like this, then, maybe your record isn't there. So, oh gosh, I'm sorry you couldn't find proof of being nomadic hunters throughout a region. And I'm sorry. Aha, wait a second. Now we have 7,000-year-old cultivation that specifically lays claim to a territory based on trees that still are there. And so now this relationship also between the First Nation and these trees is very important, because it can lay claim to land that otherwise they would not have necessarily evidence for. So it's a kind of a cool story on a lot of fronts, but it's once again also another reconsideration of agriculture and cultivation, and it's something we're seeing in the Aboriginal region and in now in Canada, where things that we hadn't traditionally associated with agriculture very much are. Right? Very much. This is very much a controlled, intentional use of distributing food source.
We have to think of it it has to be thought of as outside the Western agricultural model. That the way that the way it was propagated through fire, that the way that it was centralized. And so it couldn't be, you can't find rows and, like what we would consider a farm.
They didn't even have tractors. Like, what is Western agriculture now anyway? Like, what do we even call? That's less. By the way,
but your comment about like if 7,000 years ago they settled down more consistently in different places, they had people who were maybe traveling through that were less and less nomadic, able to use these beech hazelnuts, and but it's not. It's at the same time scale, 10,000 years ago, is like Western Europe was starting to agriculturalize.
No. Western Europe didn't exist in any frame until 5,000 years ago.
Right. Okay. So not West. I said yes. This should have been more Egyptian.
Yeah,
Nile River Valley. Yes.
Well, Nile River Valley, but the
Mesopotamians. Yeah, 10,000 years
right?
ago.
We go out to, but actually, South America had 10,000, 11,000 years ago had tiered potato plantations. Like right. like cultivation had been going on for a very long time before there was, non-hunter-gatherers in Europe. So,
but I'm saying we, as Western, like the Western culture, we like defining things by our own standards, not I found something that doesn't make sense to the way I look at the world, and so of course it must not fit into my model of the world at all in any way possible.
And the other thing the Western world likes to do is science. And science can redefine those things very quickly by getting some good evidence like this.
Which is great. I love it. Yeah. We don't need to keep talking about it. So you want to talk about the ancient Egyptians?
Yeah, this is a University of South Florida study. They found the first ever physical evidence of a hallucinogen in Egyptian mugs. This is a chemical analysis of one of the world's few remaining Egyptian best mugs. And I think in the rundown you will find a thing that maybe you can share while I'm doing this study. It's you can play around with. It's a 3D model of one of these existing mugs. And the best mug is a decorated mug that's sort of in the image of the head of Bes, which is an Egyptian god or guardian demon of some sort that was worshipped or acknowledged in some way for protection, fertility, medicinal healing, magical purification. At least this is what we've sussed from it. Several theories about the mugs and vases have been formulated on myths and some of the stories that have been surviving over time. But we don't really know what they were used for. Like some was like, oh, it was a milk drinking, you would go and drink milk out of this, or it was a honey drink, or people have all sorts of ideas. So what the research group did is they pulverized a small sample from a scraping on the inner walls of the vase. And they combined numerous analytical chemical analysis techniques to uncover what the mug last held inside. And they determined that the vase had a cocktail of psychedelic drugs, bodily fluids, and alcohol flavored with honey, sesame seeds, pine nuts, licorice, and grapes, which they say were commonly used items to make a beverage look like blood.
Oh, whoa. So not just that they were a set of components to be active in a particular way, but to look like blood.
It's both, right? So like,
Yeah.
so then you're drinking this blood concoction that also has a kick and a little bit of whatever alcohol, like a relaxant or something. So it was this sort of usually I make fun of any time that the archaeologists are finding a ritualistic aspect of this. Yeah, but this might have been, right?
It sounds a bit like I don't know. Is this like ayahuasca vampire people? What's going on
Yeah,
here?
but also I think if it was just found in a non-best mug, these sort of like very special guardian demon deity representative thing, if it was found in just an average everyday mug, I'd say
His face is a
just
bit creepy.
celebrating hard day of pyramid building. End of the day, you get a little bit of psychedelic alcohol blood drink, and you go at the local tavern or what have you. But the fact that this is a sort of specialized mug that already has a mythos of being used in a, either a healing tradition or a hopes of pregnancy or fertility tradition or something like this, that gives it that sort of more of a ritualistic feel. And then making it look like blood. That's all in the presentation, right? That's 100%.
It looks
That's
like
not
it. It
that's not
must
utility
be.
necessarily, but this is we're gonna give it a little shtick to our drink to make it look like the blood of the demon or whatever the deity is. A little bit of a fierce look on the
He's
mug.
super fierce. Bess is
Yeah.
super fierce, but the 3D model, I am going to download that, and I think I know what people are getting for Christmas this year. Although without the blood coating on the or blood-like substance on the interior. Did
Yeah,
they
I wish
say
there
anything
was a better drill down other than some sort of bodily fluid. Like maybe it's in the detailed study, which I did not read all the way.
Was it really blood?
But I hope so. Those are the worst options.
But I do wonder, so you have this compound, you have this, fierce mug, a deity. But what was the compound for? Did they have any kind of any comments on the psychoactive aspects, like what it would have? I mean, is it hallucinogenic? Would it have been sedative? Would it have been?
It would have been. There was a hallucinogenic that was common to the region in the era, as well as the alcohols is sort of relaxant. They have myths and Egyptologists that have stories, because thankfully Egyptians themselves recorded a bunch of this for what some of the uses, or some of what the best represented and what people would go turn to best for, which they assumed that the best related mugs were meant to endear. But again, some of the theories of what was in the mugs was as simple as milk. Like you would go and drink milk from the mug because that would, but this is the first time in a very long time that we've had an idea of what might be in it.
That's really cool. Interesting. Because I would imagine that depending on the exact substances and what's in there, it could give us also an idea of, okay, this is what people were ingesting. What state could it have? And this is the deity. What is the state? And like, where would people have potentially, what kind of ritual specifically might have been taking place?
Yeah, and I wonder if it even, like, I don't know that it even takes very much. It's one of those things that I always sort of consider, even something as simple as alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
Right? we have so much social learning about and around alcohol and its effects and how
Right.
people react based on drunkenness. But depending on how common alcohol is in a society, you might not have that social learning going into it. And so,
Yeah.
what would it be like if you were even forget the hallucinogenic aspects of this? And this is something we see around the world. We say this is very much also something that was used in by a pre-Aztec and Inca tribe in South America. These berries that had a hallucinogenic effect that were found in all of their outposts. It was a sort of empire at the time. I can't remember the name of the group right now, but it's fine. But they would basically hand out free drinks. It's sort of like their.
So this was like their
social outreach.
So the best mug might have been the pint glass that you get at the beer festival.
Or I'm more thinking of it as that sip of wine you get at in the Catholic thing.
Right. Okay.
Receiving of the sacrament.
I really want to know what people
today
think
it's a sip of wine because they're trying to get people. They got a long line. They need to get people through. In the very old days, it might have been a whole flask that they gave you, and you're like, oh, I'm feeling the Holy Spirit now. Oh, let me tell you, I can really. It's something so different. But that altered consciousness state. If again you don't have another context for where it's coming from, but is being delivered by a shaman or a religious person, there's one part of it that's almost like grift and shtick, like some it's like this is going to be the spirit of the deity you're going to feel communicating to you, and you have your drink, and you're like, oh gosh, there it is, and the person giving you might believe it, or they might be like, okay, we got another 10 in here to see pay their coins for the best mug, and then we're gonna have to re-up our supply, and then we'll have another group come through tomorrow, and they're just like operating it like a business, like no way to tell. But for somebody who has no context that the of altered consciousness and is receiving one of these drinks, the impression would be very real connection to the supernatural. And that might be the placebo effect operating then after that, or at least you feel like you have done the thing.
I need a Bez mug flask, not flask, Stein. Protection from evils. Your coffee. Why aren't you drinking it out of a Bez?
Oh, it's the modern version. It's got
math all over critical equations. There you go. I think this kind of this is a very interesting direction to take archaeology and putting the old stories together, right? So it's not just the structure; it's turning it into the function. You've got lots of history of different places this has been found, the uses, what's the iconography, and I love it.
But that does remind me, you did remind me, I do need to re-up my placebo prescription.
Go get it.
I'm almost out.
Go get more placebos.
Hey, it worked.
You don't have.
It worked. That's all I can say is it worked. I know it's sugar pills. It doesn't matter. I need it.
You do. Okay. All right. Oh my goodness. Okay, I have three more stories that I want to run through very quickly. I'm going to jump first to a couple of stories about monkeys and chimpanzees that both came out this last week, timed very, very coincidentally to come out with this wonderful social learning study on the Paris Major. No, they weren't. That was just a total coincidence. We learned about the great tits who learned from their neighbors by watching, and everything was happy in the neighborhood. Fred Rogers would have been very happy. How else do you make things good in the neighborhood? tolerance, and play. According to these two studies out of Durham University, researchers publishing out of Durham University on observations made at Chimfunshi Wildlife Orphanage in Zambia. They've published two studies, one in PNAS and one in PLOS, so PLOS 1. In addition to the Zambia study, that's where chimpanzees were observed. And in Brazil's Serra de Capivara National Park, their researchers looked at wild bearded capuchin monkeys. In both of the experiments, the researchers were looking at how these different groups, monkeys, chimpanzees, different primates who are related distantly, how they interacted with each other socially. So social problem solving, social relationships, and how things evolved. Similar to those great tits earlier, the capuchin monkeys, when they were given a puzzle box to look for food within, the researchers were able to find that when the monkeys were more tolerant to each other, like it's like, oh, I like you, you groom me, I groom you, we're going to be nice to each other. It was a good predictor of who was going to be able to learn from each other. So niceness, compassion, grooming behavior. We don't have to groom each other as humans. That's nice, but it's really nice to go get that, like, shampoo and everything when you get your hair done. It's fantastic.
We groom
Beyond,
each other all the time.
but that kind of social nearness led to better learning from that individual. It's like trust, right? You groom me, I trust you, I will learn from you. Naive monkeys were more likely to observe and learn from successful males in the group of monkeys. This may be different if we're looking at something like bonobos or something like in which females are the more dominant in the group. And they did not look at that. I'm just giving an aside. But the researcher, Professor Rachel Kendall of Durham University Department of Anthropology, she said bearded capuchins possess the largest toolkit among monkeys, and this is likely due to social learning, enabling skills to be passed down through the generations. Once we'd established that social learning was happening, we wanted to study what influenced the pattern of who was learning from whom. And this social tolerance, or basically they have relationships where they're tolerant of each other and not attacking each other all the time. They're like, you groom my back, I groom yours. But when they had that in their everyday lives, they were more likely to interact positively and not fight each other when it came to the puzzle box, but actually to learn. And they also found that this tolerance is also, it shifts how information about solving the puzzle box is going to move through the entire population. So if one individual is more likely to learn from another, then what you end up having is that individual learning the information. If they have a tolerant relationship with somebody else, then that other individual will learn from them. And so the information gets passed along because of those tolerant relationships within the group. Now, when it comes to the chimpanzees back in Zambia, the way that their research study played out is that these Zambian chimpanzees, they have social contagion of being friendly because of grooming and play, and that might strengthen social bonds. Social tolerance, which could lead to learning. So this group that also from Durham University, who published in PLOS One, their work was very similar, but basically they observed these chimpanzees start grooming or playing or whatever, and they were like, oh, that one started doing the same behavior, grooming or playing, after they saw somebody else do the grooming or playing. And so there was a contagion of these, what they call empathic behaviors, that particularly is pronounced in younger chimpanzees, where the play is a primary form of socialization, relationship building, social tolerance, dun, 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 learning, all of it. So I think both of these studies come together in a really neat package to show how our social connections to each other and the idea of the behaviors that we do to strengthen social bonds, to increase trust, can actually lead to better learning that leads to better overall transfer and of that knowledge from individual and to individual within a group. Oop, I'm hitting my microphone here because I'm making big arm movements. So from monkeys to chimpanzees, and then completely extrapolating to us as humans, that if we could be nice to each other and play more, perhaps, it would lead to a little bit more knowledge being shared generally and a little bit more conversation.
That's the golden rule. You learn in school.
Right?
Yeah.
We try.
That's right. I figured that one out in humans a while ago, I think. Do unto others as you would have done unto yourself or something along those lines. And then, after PE, we're all going to learn about math.
There we go. Be nice.
Go.
Let's do math. Yes. Let's see. Johnny Kaufman Art in YouTube is saying, do you think human physical play could be replaced by digital platform play? And if we're all worried about what our kids are doing online, absolutely. I mean, the relationships that our kids are building online are play, they are trust, they are social bonds. And those social bonds actually can either be with people who, they might interact with on a daily basis at school or in a, real world basis. It could also be with people across the world. And that's kind of cool. If it is, they have shown that gameplay, especially a lot of these like world-based games, they do actually help cognitive development, problem solving, and other things. So a lot of the fear mongering that we hear that is very similar to fear mongering about Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing stuff from like the 80s and video game, like it's a continuation of what are our kids doing these days? Got to keep them in line. They're playing games. They're not doing work.
Have you seen the kids? They're always spending all their time in the back of the cave playing with fossils. What's going on in our society?
Oh, what are you doing? You're just putting handprints all over the inside of the cave? Come on. And speaking of handprints on the inside of the cave, researchers have last week published their work in Scientific Reports. AI-generated poetry is indistinguishable from human-written poetry and is rated more favorably.
To who? Who's? I want to know who's reviewing the poetry. That's
people that they got as people to do the study. So they specifically for this study looked for non-expert readers.
Okay, well then fine. Yeah, you can pull a non-expert reader with anything. That unconvincing.
So the question though is, what do you mean by a non-expert reader? Is this a non-expert reader of poetry? So I would say I have read a lot of poetry, but I would not say I'm an expert reader of poetry. So these participants, they had 1,634. I'm an expert reader, I think. I have a good sense of language. I have, I've read a lot of poems. My mom was a poet.
But like to non-expert readers, that rhymed. Like, if that's the threshold, like, then stop. Like, that's not.
And you just hit the nail on the head for the way that this all worked.
Okay.
So they used ChatGPT 3.5, generating 50 poems, a number 5 poems for each of 10 poets who are well known as poets throughout history, well regarded as famous. Write a short poem in the style of poet was the prompt for ChatGPT. So it wasn't anything. And they had 15 qualitative features that participants rated: overall quality, imagery, rhythm, sound, beautiful, inspiring, lyrical, meaningful, moving, original, profound, witting, particular theme, mood, emotion, rhyme, blah, 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 blah. They tried to predict responses. So they predicted that participants would be unable to distinguish AI poetry from human written poetry because there had been a study where GPT-2 poetry had been indistinguishable from human written poetry previously. So that study probably wasn't a good one either. But at least they predicted poetry from ChatGPT 3.5 would be at least as good as the human selected best poems generated by ChatGPT 2. Further study recruitment: 1,634 US-based participants at the median age of 37, basically half male, half female. And they were... And really, it doesn't say anything about whether or not they knew poetry or not. They were recruited through something called Prolific. And so it doesn't say much else about the recruitment that I can find at this point in time. But I didn't stop when you said to say stop, but the result in effect is that non-expert poetry readers couldn't tell the difference between AI-generated poems and or the original authors. They figured that the authors were doing as great a job as whoever the original poets were. And the AI-generated poems were rated more favorably for rhythm and beauty. And in their abstract, they say, this contributed to their mistaken identification as human authored. The findings suggest that the participants employed shared yet flawed heuristics to differentiate AI from human poetry. The simplicity of AI-generated poems may be easier for non-experts to understand, leading them to prefer AI-generated poetry and misinterpret the complexity of human poems as incoherence generated by AI.
So
which I think is fascinating.
Yeah, here's the thing. Actually, because more of I've been listening to this, I've been thinking about like doing something in the voiceover. It's a very interesting concept. Mm-hmm. When Jack Kerouac wrote On the Road, something that is sprinkled throughout that novel are haikus.
Mm-hmm. Simple.
Haikus that he wrote as a poet.
They have a specific form and function. Yeah.
They have a specific form and function, but he didn't like put haikus separated out like, okay, and now we're going to take a break from our narrative and put in a haiku. He threw the haiku into the middle of a train of thought conversation about explanation of where he was going on, what was happening at the time. And it has this interesting cadence when you read it, but it's a haiku slapped into the middle of part of a story. And you don't, it's not isolated, so it doesn't look like one. Mm-hmm. But because he's sampling poetry in a narrative, you could also like reverse engineer that and like come up with something that looks very much like a Kerouac sort of phraseology. Also, Burroughs used to do, he would take newspaper or books and scissor out sentences and lines, throw them in a hat, and then pull out 2 or 3, and then work from there on to finish some prose. So,
Interesting.
ChatGPT, in a way, is
kind of like Burroughs.
because part of what a lot of poets try to do is get away from the normal structure of literature to express other ideas. So if it's really easy for ChatGPT to break those rules, then you could really come up with some interesting stuff.
I think
it never matters. Like, the intention of the writer, by the way, never matters. It never has, and it never will. It's the impact on the reader is the only thing that counts. And it can be a different impact on different people reading a thing. So essentially, it doesn't matter if the poetry you like came from ChatGPT. If a thing you connect with is pulled from multiple sources and strung together like a Frankenstein of words, if you relate to it, it doesn't matter where it came from.
And I think that is I think that's a really interesting point because, right, with art, if you relate to it, doesn't matter where it came from. But with poetry, there is something to the way that feeling is conveyed, that reality or that the internal world is conveyed through the word. And poetry is a shorthand. It's not prose. It is not all the words. It is fewer words. And at a certain point, we learned when we were growing up, oh, poetry is supposed to rhyme. Here's a sonnet. Here's this. You learn the basic forms. And what I find fascinating for this is that poems that were deemed more AI or more human, Walt Whitman, Lord Byron, Samuel Butler,
Byron to me makes
Sylvia Plath, Allen Ginsberg.
So all of these make sense for different ways. Allen Ginsberg, very much a train of thought, sort of throwing out ideas and feelings and words, which
the complexity
feels like
is done right. The complexity is huge, but it doesn't fit like a rig and Sylvia Plath.
It doesn't necessarily have a set form. Lord Byron, on the other hand,
it's too complex. AI.
8-beat cadence and everything rhymes. 8 beats and everything rhymes. 8 beats and everything rhymes. 8 beats and it rhymes. And it's like the entire novel-esque, tombs of this 8-beat rhyming cadence over and over and over again. In Lord Byron, mathematically easily producible, and then recognized, and it will look sort of machine-esque in a way.
And
Walt Whitman, you throw in enough nature-y appreciation words, and you feel like, oh yeah, that's.
But
Shakespeare would be maybe trickier to fake because there's not just a language and cadence, but there's also always is saying something with every line that has to have a connected.
You expect Shakespeare, because you learn Shakespeare like in high school if you do it right. And so you kind of learn to expect that Shakespeare is going to be hard to understand. So, this is hard. Okay, I'm going to go for the crazy hard to understand thing. That is a human. It's Shakespeare who wrote it. Versus maybe Lord Byron, you're more likely.
Very cut and dry, easy to read at any age.
And so, but that's the weird thing, right? Like maybe some poets are less likely or more. That's what I think is fascinating here. Whitman, Byron, Butler, Plath, Ginsberg, more likely to be considered AI authored. Chaucer, Shakespeare, Dickinson, Lasky, T.S. Eliot, more likely to be seen as human, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
I think there's some fun in there with the words that we use and how we use them to portray our internal experiences. What does that mean for how it can be reproduced by a probability machine?
Yeah, I honestly, I could not tell a Walt Whitman phrase from one that was generated based on it because it, to me, it all sounds the same to a very large extent. Byron is so interesting to me though, because he uses very direct, simple language, but the thing that I think it would be the clue in Byron is he has so much sarcastic wit. And sarcastic wit, I think, would be if you saw enough of the phrases, if there wasn't something biting against, if there wasn't like a backhanded compliment or a sort of sarcastic praise of some sort,
Yeah.
it would be, I'd be like, okay, it's missing this bite to it. But it would be simple language that rhymes in an 8-beat cadence every time that could look machine. It would have to be
Exactly.
the context that would give away something like that. And I think Burroughs, as much as I like, not Burroughs, Ginsberg, as much as I like Ginsberg, I think I might have a hard time, honestly, like, if you're getting into any kind of train of thought.
I don't think AI can do Ginsberg. I mean, seriously. So here is an example of the AI writing in the style of Ginsberg.
Okay.
In the quiet of the night's embrace, we let our minds drift into space and find ourselves in a state of grace as we explore the mysteries of our race.
No, not at all. Yeah, no, okay, he didn't fool at all. I'm so sorry.
No.
I take that completely back.
You can't even. The AI cannot do that. The AI cannot do Ginsberg.
Right. Right. No, totally wrong. Totally missed the mark.
Right. And then we have T.S. Eliot. This is one of T.S. Eliot's real poems. I observe our sentimental friend, the moon, or possibly, fantastic, I confess, it may be Prester John's balloon, or an old battered lantern hung aloft to light poor travelers to their distress. She then, how you digress. And I then, someone frames upon the keys that exquisite nocturne with which we explain the night and moonshine, music which we seize to body forth our own vacuity. She then, does this refer to me? Oh no, it is I who am inane. You, madam, are the eternal humorist, the eternal enemy of the absolute, giving our vagrant moods the slightest twist, with your aid indifferent and imperious, at a stroke of our mad poetics to confute. And are we then so serious? T.S. Eliot. Me, poorly read.
That wasn't. Sure.
Emily Dickinson. Come slowly, Eden lips unused to thee, bashful, sip thy jessamines as the fainting bee, reaching late his flower, round her chamber hums, counts his nectars, enters, and is lost in balms. I swear I love Emily Dickinson. But it's very interesting.
Do the Byron.
Do Lord Byron.
The 8-beat cadence.
Okay,
every single line.
This is AI, okay? She walks the earth with grace and pride, a beauty that cannot be denied, with eyes that shine like stars above, and lips that speak of endless love. But though she wears a smile so sweet, a broken heart doth lie beneath. For in her chest a pain doth beat, a love unrequited without relief. And so she walks with heavy heart, a figure haunting in the dark. For love, the sweetest of all art, can also leave a painful mark.
Totally believable. Totally believable as Byron, because the 8 beats and the ever rhyme between two, like, is exactly like, and because he did such volumes of this that he's sometimes covering very trivial material to get the story rolling. It doesn't always have like this huge, purposeful, impactful short stanza. He wrote novels in this format, so he's even covering mundane in 8-beat rhyme. So almost anything you do in Byron style look very much like a Byron phrase.
So I think what I'm interested in other documents that they might have, assessment poems that are examples that they've used. There's a bunch of metadata that's available for this entire project that's available on GitHub through this OSF Home, AI and Poetry. And so this Open Science Foundation, OSF is Open Science Foundation. And so they, using GitHub and similar storage, they have made all of the files available. And so you can read all of their survey files, look at their data, see what you think of the different poems that they were using in this study, and whether or not you believe it. And so the big question is, what does it take to be a poetry expert, as per what they would have listed in their study, I think, right? The take-home message that to most people, complexity in poetry was more likely to be AI than human, or like something that's confusing in a way that's like offbeat. I mean, that to me is like, okay, any beat poet, you're out. You're immediately going to be thought of as AI. But yeah, I think it's fascinating.
Well, I guess non-expert meaning, now I kind of get it. Like,
but I think
have you ever
familiar,
read?
Right?
Have you ever read Byron? If you say yes, you're out, because you're gonna at least have a preconceived notion of that it's 8 beats and is gonna rhyme, right? Like, so I get, like, if you haven't read the thing and then trying to determine, then it kind of makes sense.
I love Zombie Tom Hanks' AI prompt. So for anyone out there, write a response to AI poetry in the style of Justin from This Week in Science. I want to know any and all answers that come from it.
Yeah, I should upload all of the disclaimers to the interwebs, and then have
a lot of them are on the interwebs already.
Have the AI start writing.
Yeah.
Have the AI start writing from them.
I'm sure.
There we go. And see if the audience can tell. That would be a tricky one. What's a Justin disclaimer, and what was the AI generated one?
And which one did Kiki or Blair occasionally add in?
Oh yeah,
through the years. Oh yeah, David Huss says, I wonder if E.E. Cummings would make sense. A lot of people, I love E.E. Cummings' work. But I wonder how many people would identify it as human or AI from a non-expert perspective. Anyway, we don't need to be experts, but maybe you should read yourself some nice poetry and take yourself off to dreamland to sleep, perchance to dream. Perchance. Did we make it? Did we make it to the end of another show, Justin?
All right, there's the rub. Yes, I think we have. Shuffling off this podcast coil.
Because all the world is a stage and all of us just poor players upon it. I don't remember all the words. Oh, all the old ones, the goodies. Everyone, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being here in our theater on the round. And I hope that you enjoyed the show. It is not AI produced or performed. Everything came from real human beings, no matter what anyone might like to tell you. Shout outs, Fada, not an AI, who actually helps with social media and our show notes. Thank you so much for doing that over there on YouTube. Gord Arnlor, thank you for helping man the chat rooms, keep them in good position, everybody happy. Everybody who's not AI, who I'm looking at right now, I see you in our Discord. Hey, I see you over in our YouTube, our Twitch, our Facebook places. I see you over there. Thanks for not being AI and for being real. Oh, Identity 4 over on Twitter is giving some very interesting words. That's really interesting. Okay. Anyway, you got to join the Patreon to be in the Discord and see things like the poetry that Identity 4 has meted out there. And 84, thank you for recording the show. And also, Rachel, for your assistance in editing the show. And finally, as always, I absolutely must thank our Patreon sponsors for continuing to make sure that we're able to do this show week after week after week. Thank you to Eden Mundell, Alan Viola, Aaron Anathema, Arthur Kepler, Craig Potts, Mary Gertz, Teresa Smith, Richard Badge, Bob Coles, Kent Northcote, George Corris, Pierre Valaswar, John Ratnaswamy, Chris Wozniak, Vegard Shefstad, Donovan Styles, a.k.a. John Stylo, Ali Coffin, Reagan Shubru, Sarah Forfar, Don Mundis, PIG, Stephen Alberack, Daryl Myshak, Andrew Swanson, Fred S104, Sky Luke, Paul Runovich, Kevin Reardon, Noodles Jack, Brian Carrington, David E. Youngblood, Sean Clarence Lamb, John McKee, Greg Raleigh, Mark Hessenflow, Steve Leesman, a.k.a. Z. McKen, Hayes, Howard Tan, Christopher Rappin, Richard, Brendan Minish, Johnny Gridley, Remy Dade, G. Burton Lattimore, Flying Out, Christopher Dreyer, Audium, Greg Briggs, John Atwood, Rudy Garcia, Dave Wilkinson, Rodney Lewis, Paul, Philip Shane, Kurt Larson, Craig Landon, Sue Doster, Jason Olds, Dave Neighbor, Eric Knapp, Lon Makes, EO, Adam Mishkan, Kevin Parachan, Aaron Luthen, Bob Calder, Marjorie, Paul D. Disney, David Simmerly, Patrick Carraro, and Tony Steele. Thank you all for your support. On Patreon. And if you'd like to become a Patreon sponsor, get on that Discord and see great poetry like Identity Force served up in there. You need to become a Patreon sponsor to get in there. On next week's show, we are actually not going to be airing live at this normal time of 8 p.m. Pacific time. We're going to be airing live at 11 a.m. Pacific time for a special TWIS giving show, which Blair is going to join us for. So don't miss it. 11 a.m. Pacific time next Wednesday, November 27th. Put that on your calendar. Oh, yes, we're not going to be, but we are going to be broadcasting live from what, Justin?
Our YouTube and our Facebook channels.
And Twitch. But if you want to listen to us...
Are we also on the Twitch? Yes, and our Twitch channel as well, I guess.
Totally. If you want to listen to us as a podcast, search for This Week in Science wherever podcasts are found. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to get your friends to subscribe too.
For information on anything you've heard here today, show notes and links to the stories are available on our website, www.twis.org, where you can go in, find the actual research paper, read through every detail, and then come up with your own follow-up research project.
Oh, yeah. We like stimulating graduate research projects. It's one of our favorite things to do. We love your feedback. So if you're doing one of those projects, let us know. If there's a topic you would like us to cover or address, a suggestion for an interview, let us know. One of our social media channels. You can find us on Blue Sky, over on Mastodon. Universidon, I think, is the one where we are. We're on Threads also. And as TWIS Science, I believe. So you can look for us there. You can also send us an email. But if you do, make sure to put TWIS in the subject line so that your email doesn't get spam filtered into, I don't know, a haunted house that was used in a research study that all of the people ran away from and never came back to again because it was Danish and it was too scary.
That's scary. We do look forward to discussing science with you again next week. And if you've learned anything from this show, remember,
it's all in your head.
This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science, it's the end of the world. So I'm setting up shop, got my banner unfurled. It says the scientist is in, I'm gonna sell my advice. Show them how to stop the robots with a simple device. I'll reverse global warming with a wave of my hand. And all it'll cost you is a couple of grand. 'Cause this week's science is coming your way. So everybody listen to what I say. I use the scientific method for all that it's worth. And I'll broadcast my opinion all over the earth. 'Cause it's This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science.
This week in science. This week in science. This week in science. This week